I think we're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the 8th webinar of the Culture and Health webinar series for 2020. My name is Niels Fietje, and I work at the WHO Regional Office for Europe, where I'm a technical officer in the Behavioral and Cultural Insights Unit and leading a project on the cultural contexts of health and well-being. The webinar that you're about to listen to and hopefully participate in is part of a series which is funded by the Wellcome Trust and the product of a collaboration between WHO Europe, the WHO Collaborating Center on Global Health History at the University of York, as well as the WHO Collaborating Center on Culture and Health at the University of Exeter. Now, this webinar series examines important and timely topics at the intersection of health, well-being, and culture, and it intends to kind of create a forum that brings together experts from the humanities and the social sciences, as well as senior officials from the WHO and the UN agencies, together with voices from NGOs, think tanks, civil society, and of course the wider public, to exchange ideas and perspectives that explore the social, historical, and cultural contexts of health. So during this webinar, our panelists will spend the first 30 minutes making brief opening statements about today's topic, the role of culture in defining and thinking about the the SDGs, and how a generation has been potentially worried sick about those. During the webinar, you will have the opportunity to ask questions by going to a website called Slido, that's www.slido.com, and entering the event code WHOCH. If you're watching the video from the WHO page, you should be able to see the Slido question app just below the video. So if you can't see it on your screen, you can scroll down and you should be able to see a box there where you can ask your questions and enter them for us to talk about after the presentations. So I hope we'll have about 30 minutes of opening statements and then 30 minutes of discussion that will include your questions that you post on Slido. Please also be aware that we will have a questionnaire up on the Slido page, which helps us to evaluate and improve the webinar. So please do take a moment to fill it in at the end of the webinar. And if you'd like to be kept informed about the webinars, please also leave your email address so we can get in touch. Now, in today's webinar, we'll be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, but from the perspective of the millennial generation. So the SDGs, as they're known, are often talked about in positive and aspirational and inclusive language, especially by UN agencies such as WHO. And while it's undoubtedly true that they're a dramatic improvement on the Millennium Development Goals that came before them, they're not without their own challenges. And one of these challenges is that the generation who will be living with the consequences of the SDGs tend to have a very limited role in them. And the realities of the consequences of the world we might be moving towards, particularly with regard to social equity and climate change, coupled with a feeling of helplessness and often also a sense that these issues are not being taken seriously enough by a generation, is having very real mental health effects in some cases. So today we're going to have a panel of 3 people. I'll be introducing them as we move along. And yeah, so I'd like to take the opportunity now to hand over to the floor to Caroline Hickman. Caroline is a climate psychology therapist, a member of the Climate Psychology Alliance, and a researcher and lecturer at the University of Bath in the United Kingdom. So Caroline, if I may, I'd like to hand over to you. And thanks for your presentation today.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me. So I'm not going to
share slides. I'm going to talk about my work, both as a psychotherapist and also lecturer, researcher at the University of Bath, but I'm going to bring in some examples of what young people have been saying to me to try and illustrate what I'm saying. But I want to start with a couple of newspaper articles from the UK. From the 15th of September, anxiety in the UK, we made the front page of the Guardian newspaper. Anxiety in the UK, cases have trebled in a decade. They're talking about an explosion in anxiety over the past decade because of the financial crash, austerity, Brexit, apologies, climate change, and social media, blamed for huge rises in the condition. This was an enormous study analysing 6.6 million people at 795 general medical practitioner settings. It's absolutely enormous, but it's significantly impacting on young people, affecting 30%, particularly young women aged 18 to 24. So that's a study that took place since 1998. So that, and then if you put that alongside other articles the same week and the week following, 1/5 of the world's countries are at risk of their ecosystem collapsing because of the destruction of wildlife and their habitats, according to analysis. So when we start talking about how young people are feeling about what's going on in the world at the moment, we have to frame it in terms of the news. Similarly, I want to just tell you about an experience I had a week last Monday. I had 5 psychotherapy clients a week last Monday, 3 adults, 2 teenagers. And the 3 adults, for perfectly reasonable reasons, talked about their marriage difficulties. They talked about problems with work, all sorts of things. The 2 teenagers only wanted to talk about the American election. They did not want to talk about anything else because for them, it felt personal. It felt personal, the outcome of the election and the consequences of the decision-making of the election and the impact on the environment and the impact on climate change was all that was important to them. So I'm trying to talk about how important this can be for large numbers of young people. And I may be generalizing, but I also think these clinical examples help illustrate something. I want to also give you a few quotes from some of the children and young people that I'm doing research with. So I'm researching with children and young people, not just here in the UK, but also in the Maldives, in the United States of America, in Brazil, Nigeria, Sweden, France. So I'm talking to young people and children globally about how they feel about the climate and biodiversity crisis. And I've been talking with them for 5 years, which is significant because 5 years ago, a lot of people felt, incorrectly, of course, that children and young people didn't need to worry quite so much about this. Whereas today, with the rise of the school strikers and awareness about the importance of this for young people, I think that attitude probably hopefully would not be felt today. But I've been talking with children and young people for 5 years, and I can honestly tell you that they are frightened for more than 5 years. So I want to give you a couple of quotes to help illustrate this. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about what I'm finding in that work. So a quote from a teenager: "I'm sad my friends are dying. My friends, the fish, are dying." I think that really illustrates the way for a lot of young people, again, this interrelationship between the pressure and the emotional impact that they're feeling themselves, and they relate that to the natural world. They don't separate themselves off so much from the natural world and from the environment. It's felt personally, and that's partly because of the impact on themselves and their own future, but it's also because of this sense of injustice and unfairness, which underpins a lot of young people's feelings about this. And they link that systemically to other social activist movements at the moment, for example, around Black Lives Matter, because they are seeing this clearly as a systemic problem. Another young person in the Maldives said to me, climate change is a little bit like Thanos in the Avengers Endgame, whose ideology is to kill off half the world so the other half can thrive. He said, but the problem is, he said, is we're the half being killed off. He said, people don't know what's happening to the Maldives and people don't seem to care. And I would extend that to the young people and the children in Vanuatu, the Marshall Islands, Bangladesh, who are in many ways embodying the immediate pressure of this. They also said to me in the Maldives, they said, we saw online, they said that people in Iceland had a funeral for a glacier, which was a beautiful ritual. They weren't criticizing this, but they were sitting there feeling confused and despaired because they said, well, who's going to have a funeral for us? We're going to be underwater soon. What does the world think is going to happen to our country? Other young people in the UK and in France and in Sweden have said things to me like, climate change is happening to rebalance something that was unbalanced. Climate change is happening as revenge because you've messed up the planet. Adults have lost sight of what's really important. We know we're going to be underwater, but no one's interested. Adults have made the world a worse place for animals and for children. So this is why it's happening now, to try and wake adults up to just how serious this situation is. So I want to start with those quotes because I really want us to be hearing this through their experience. So as I said, I'm talking with children globally about this, but I don't want to talk about them just experiencing anxiety. Eco-anxiety is a very popular term. It's a term I have no problem with because, frankly, anything that gets people talking about feelings is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. But anxiety is often the gateway emotional response as we wake up to the reality of what we're facing. It's actually a mentally healthy response. We measure mental health and mental well-being by people's capacity to respond accurately to external reality. So if we're feeling anxiety or we're feeling depression or we're feeling despair, actually that's a mentally healthy response. So young people are feeling this mix of feelings, but often feeling that they're not allowed to speak out about this, or that somehow speaking out about this gets minimized or patronized or even criminalized, or they're told not to talk about it. And part of what makes all of this worse for children and young people is the way they perceive that adults struggle to understand that, or misunderstand it, or try to silence them, or minimize this. Now, I want to talk about the scale that I'm talking about here, because obviously some children and young people are relatively unaware and not distressed about this, of course, but they will often take their lead from adults around them. And if adults are showing concern, then that gives permission to children and young people to show concern. So at one end of the spectrum, we've got young people and children who've got some concern. But in my psychotherapy practice and in my research, I'm finding now increasing numbers of children and young people who are extremely concerned, who are self-harming, who are struggling to know how to survive on a planet that they feel just does not care, not just about themselves, but about animals and about children globally around the world. One young person in the UK said to me, he said, tell me why I should want to live in a world that just does not care about what's happening to us. And he has a point. And I do not frame this as mental illness. Of course, I talk to him about finding other reasons to stay alive and other reasons to find meaning in life. But he also, his despair, it feels very real to him. And I mustn't dismiss that or step away from that or minimize it or patronize him and say, well, this is, too big for you to worry about. Because as I said a minute ago, one of the reasons the young people are worrying so much about it is because they perceive adults and they perceive people in power as not stepping up quickly enough to take the immediate action that needs to be taken. So we've got this systemic understanding, we've got this powerful, strong, empathetic relationship with the natural world. It is, in my belief, an emergent mental health problem. And I do not want anyone out there to think that I'm saying for 1 second this is a mental illness. This is an emotionally healthy response to the reality of what's going on. But it's not okay. It's not okay for us to be leaving children and young people feeling this on their own or not knowing how to get alongside them, not knowing how to stand alongside them and tolerate their feelings. I also don't think it's okay to kind of frame this as problematic, because what I frequently say to people is, well, you're feeling this stress and this distress and anxiety because you care. So actually, this is the price you pay for caring. This is the price you pay for being alive and awake and having a social conscience and understanding this as an issue of social justice. So we need to work together communally and intergenerationally so that we're not leaving young people to suffer this on behalf and embody this on behalf of the rest of us. But we also need to frame it as, well, actually, I would worry about people who weren't feeling this way at the moment. I want to finish with a quote from a young woman when I started this research, I started asking quite a lot of young children, how do I talk to you about this without frightening you, without traumatizing you? Because a lot of parents really struggle and they don't want to frighten their children. So that really gets in the way of them talking with their children about these things. And I think parents need to feel confident and supported in having these complex but important conversations. So I'm going to quote this young woman from Sweden. I asked her, she was 8 at the time. I said, well, how do we have these conversations? And she said, well, she said, you've got to tell me the truth. She said, you've got to tell me the truth about the climate crisis. She said, because if you don't tell me the truth, she said, you're lying to me. She said, and if you lie to me, then I can't trust you. She said, and if I can't trust you, she said, then I won't talk to you about how I feel. She said, so tell me the truth. She said, but don't tell me all the bad stuff all at once. She said, tell me some difficult stuff, then tell me some good stuff. Tell me some bad stuff, then tell me some good stuff. She said, so I love the wisdom of this 8-year-old. She's really showing us therapeutically and relationally how to approach this. But she finished with a real killer line. She said, anyway, she said, I'm not a baby. So thank you, young woman in Sweden, you know who you are. So Barack Obama said, you know, our children in the future will look back at us and say, did we do all that we could have done to help children and young people with this? And I think that's a really beautiful way to kind of end this, that we need to continually ask ourselves, are we doing all that we could do? And if not, why not? And if children and young people are being worried sick about this, then we've got to say, well, why? And frankly, why aren't we? And part of that is about saying sorry to children and young people. Sorry that adults may not have got this right all the time, and we need to step up and we need to do more and we need to do better. But psychologically, emotionally, what we also need to do more of is listen to you and tolerate how it feels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. That was a really wonderful summary and very insightful, both by you, but also on behalf of that young lady, that young 8-year-old who wonderfully came up with on her own with the idea of the good news sandwich, which you know, we should all probably be using more of in our lives anyway. So very, very helpful. And I think also particularly it's very useful to hear you remind us that we really should not be framing this. And I hope we haven't done this in preparing this webinar, that this isn't about mental illness. This is about mental health. This is about mental health and mental health challenges that are associated with the dynamics of a globe that, you know, is experiencing challenges, issues. I'd like to take the opportunity now to move to our next speaker. Ane Sorelli is a student of political science at the University of Oslo and a Norwegian youth delegate for the UNFCCC as part of the Norwegian Children and Youth Council. And she's also former vice president of the youth organization Spire, that she continues to be involved in, and I believe has been involved in for over 4 years. Anna, we've asked you to kind of represent the youth, as it were, and I understand completely that that is a silly position to put you in. So that's not what we're asking you. We're asking you for your opinions. We're asking you for your insights. But we want to be very clear that we take those seriously, and we're very keen to hear what it is that you have to say. So Anna, please, over to you.
Thank you so much, Niels, for the introduction, and good day to everyone who's joined in. It's a pleasure to share this hour with you. To start off, I want to say that even though I will now mostly refer to the climate issue, because that's my focus area, the SDGs are interlinked. In my opinion, SDG 13, that's climate action, along with SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, SDG 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on land, is fundamental for the achievement of the other SDGs. For example, how can we assure to reach a point of no poverty or zero hunger if people are losing their livelihoods or housing to rapid flooding or drought caused by climate change? So this is maybe the background of my engagement and why I think this is really important. And in my perspective, as a young, engaged person in matters regarding climate change and development, I can most certainly relate to the issues that are addressed here by Caroline. It can be really hard to live in a situation where science on one hand shows us what we need to do to reverse the damage we're doing to this planet, and having politicians on the other hand not taking political action according to the science. And then to see the injustices caused by climate change already playing out and affecting lots of people's lives, that can be really difficult, and it can create a feeling of hopelessness. At the same time, as we see people getting climate anxiety, other people are also feeling guilty that they don't, that they can't be a part of the solution. At least that's how I've seen it. I have an example from a friend of mine who is dependent on her car because she's living in quite a rural area of Norway. And she told me once that she's not comfortable with becoming a member of a climate NGO because of her lifestyle. She feels guilty, and she don't feel that she is or can be part of the solution because of her way of living right now. So that to me is also a really important question. How can we make climate action and supporting politicians that lead to climate action, politics that lead to climate action, make that as normal as anything for anyone? And at the same time as it can feel hopeless and big and just messy, the world is also moving slowly in a right direction, and that's at least what gives me motivation to see the positive changes. That really gives hope. And though most of the time progress are moving too slow, we have success stories. For example, I want to mention the climate lawsuit in the Netherlands, where a Dutch court ordered leaders to take action. And it's the first time a nation has been required by its court to take action against climate change. And another example is our children's trust in the United States, where children and youth are filing a constitutional climate lawsuit against the states. And of course, I want to mention the climate strikers movement, which is still happening regardless of the crisis that we are in today. It's happening online. Youth are striking for the climate and their rights of a better future. And politicians both in Norway and other countries have told that the climate strikers movements and this mass mobilization we've seen the last couple of years, and especially the last year, is helping to push the climate and environmental issues higher on the political agenda. And also electoral campaigns. For example, as you mentioned, Caroline, I've also been one of the youth that's been checking my phone constantly this last week to see whether or not Biden would make it and win the election. So for me, also remembering to celebrate those moments of progression is something I try to do to keep myself sane and happy in my everyday life. Yeah, and also now that Biden is elected as president, it looks like the global efforts to tackle climate crisis will stand stronger. So in general, like we see a discourse in the society that's changing. And that to me is important to remember when we feel this hopelessness. And never before have we focused so much on sustainability in the society. Investments are shifting, customers' patterns are changing, and people are getting more and more engaged and woke. So the world is changing, but it's just not in the right pace. But what I think the corona pandemic so dramatically has shown us is how this crisis will and how this crisis there still exists will and opportunity to restructure our society, and if only it matters enough. And what we can take with us from this challenging time is that the cooperation and will, both inside and outside of state borders, is very much possible and necessary to tackle any crisis we face. Look at, for example, how Amsterdam, for instance, has decided to embrace the so-called donut economics model to mend post-coronavirus economy, economy that will help the city to thrive in balance with the planet. In these challenging times, I think it's possible, at least for me, to talk about how I'm feeling and to acknowledge that it can be really, really difficult and tough, but at the same time also remind myself that humanity has overcome difficulties before. There are progress going on, and we are going to manage this crisis as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. You warned me in the beginning that you were an optimist. And I think it's wonderful to hear that optimism at the end. I mean, I don't think you're naive. I think you very clearly illustrated the kind of challenges, but it's great to hear that that sense of optimism. We might want to discuss after our next speaker. Maybe one of the things that we want to have a little chat about is how those who are not as optimistic as you, how they, if there are any people in your kind of circumstances or in your circles, how are they kind of dealing with these situations? People who are perhaps more pessimistic. But I'll park that question for now, and move us on to Emilia Aragon de Leon. She's a technical officer and a colleague here in the WHO regional office, working on sustainable development and health, at WHO Europe. So Emilia, I'd love to give you the floor now to give us some reflections from both the kind of WHO Europe perspective, but also as a young person yourself, your kind of perceptions of these issues as a member of the WHO family. Over to you.
Thank you, Niels, and thank you, Caroline and Anne, for the brilliant insights from your work and from your different activities as climate activists as well. You definitely have represented a lot of like the work that sometimes we miss at the WHO because we work so much with governments, and there's a lot of people out there who have brilliant insights in how things need to change and how quickly things need to change, and how we need to accelerate the progress. I actually wanted to, I'd say I'm also an optimist like Anne, and I'm always trying to figure out ways in which we can constructively try to change the system and find out ways and approaches in which we could change the system and promote, make it easier, I guess, for policymakers to make the decisions as well, because I know that indeed we know what needs to be done, and the science has told us, has shown us what we're facing if we don't change the way that we're living and the way that we're leading our societies and our lives. But sometimes translating that knowledge into action is not easy. And also because the context in where that knowledge has been created, for example, is different. We cannot say that the same policies that or decisions and activities that work in Europe will work in Latin America or certain different climates, different cultural contexts, etc. So that's not always easy, and that's the role that organizations, for example, like us here at the WHO, have, which is to help translate that knowledge into actionable strategies for policymakers. And in that sense, we've been working in my program, which was dealing with sustainable development and health, is trying to influence how policy is made. And just as Anne also introduced in the beginning, the SDGs have been a very useful instrument because they are indeed interlinked. And we understand better they help us communicate better as well to older people, to younger people, and to people in different contexts as well, to people who may only speak finances, to people who may only speak technology, that the work that they do and their actions are all interconnected and are relevant to achieve sustainability. And sustainability in the end, it's not only about environmental sustainability, but it's also about inclusivity, which is something I really like about the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. It's not, we no longer believe that a sustainable development is just around we make sure that the environment is taken care of, but it's also ensuring that all humans on Earth also enjoy of the benefits of sustainability and the benefits of the economy and the benefits of development and infrastructure and technology, etc. So in that sense, what we've been trying to do with the WHO in our program specifically is trying to tap on the opportunities that exist. Some of them may be when countries are making health policies, for example. If we know that there's a health policy, we tried in there to on one hand ensure that there's different stakeholders engaged, so that there's more people engaged, that there's some there's country offices that are engaging youth, engaging civil society in order to make the policies comprehensive. We also try to ensure that to facilitate those conversations between different stakeholder groups, and also, and on the other hand, engaging also other sectors that are very relevant for health, like sectors related to environment, sectors related to transport, sectors, cities as well, for example, instead of like all the decisions being done at the high level of government. We've also been trying to simplify the approach because the SDGs are so very complex. So in that sense, we also defined an approach in which we help the policymakers understand what needs to be done. And the approach is very flexible as well. And we explain in this approach, and we support them in implementing it. In first of all, we need to engage broadly, and that they cannot do this alone, but we need the other sectors engaged, and we need as well different segments of society engaged. And there's different mechanisms to do that. For example, one example of those is this UN group of that are engaging in the climate change negotiations. There's also other mechanisms as well, which are more formal, in which like the health sector communicates with other sectors as well. And then we talk about also assessing. And in that area, what we try for policymakers and people in government to see are to try to look beyond the numbers, for example, that also measure things, measure progress beyond just economic progress, and include other measures. And that's also something useful that we found about the SDGs, because the broad set of indicators, which is more than 200 indicators, give is like an opportunity to actually measure things that traditionally have not been measured in the past. And we're also working and trying to introduce a bit more of qualitative evidence. That is, it is not just about numbers. And we engage in different processes, stories, etc., that we try to demonstrate how change is not the same for all in society, for example, or also how things work in real life. And we also try to go beyond, because we know that this is for change to happen needs to be a systemic change. And in that sense, we look into what policies are done. Are there any bottlenecks, any barriers that are not allowing to make the progress? Because the intentions may exist, but there might be many other barriers that are not allowing progress to be made. And then once we identify all of those things and try to work with them in identifying them, there's also different mechanisms in which we promote alignment. And that's like pretty much kind of like breaking those bottlenecks, freeing the bottlenecks or breaking the barriers. And we try to use different mechanisms that are formal, like, for example, financing. What gets financed? Where does the money come from? How money is collected? So that also implies taxing policies and finding out opportunities to increase financing for health, for example, or increase the costs of non-healthy commodities, like alcohol, sugar, etc., and any other tobacco, any other things that are harmful for our health, and also that in their production may be harmful for the environment as well, and in the whole supply chain. And last but not least, I'd say we also try to engage in different accountability mechanisms as well. And by accountability mechanisms, this is an area where the youth can also play a very strong role. And we definitely are promoting lately with COVID as well. We identified that there are 3 things that will help us accelerate progress. We identify, for example, trying to change our economies. We have also identified to promote the use of technology and try to harness that technology in a way that is inclusive as well. And then what Anne was saying, which is that community activism that will push for policymakers to get action, to do the action, to ensure that progress is made, but also to try to liaise in different mechanisms. And in this way, Niels, if maybe you can just help me putting that one slide that I shared with you, because here I'll show a little bit just some mechanisms that exist both formal and informally, in which not just the youth, but any person can engage in their context. Thank you. And so what we see is like one of them is like we could definitely work with government institutions, and there's different bodies from the government that have been designated to work on SDGs and how we can inform them, how we can provide stories to them, how we can provide more data and reach different segments of society. We can also work with parliamentarians as well in our countries, engage with the local authorities in the different mechanisms that they have. And there's other also formal processes that are happening at the global level, at the national level, at cities level. Like there's these voluntary national reviews, which are different. These are mechanisms in which the countries are revising their progress. And we want to promote very much transparency through these mechanisms as well, and using international human rights mechanisms. And there's any other, for example, government consultations. We know that there's a lot of young people promoting the use of social media, promoting digital platforms as well that help engage. And there's another one is the working on oversight for accountability. And we're really good also at using and improving data, also because we're so tech savvy and are very good at leaving our information in digital, our digital footprint. And as I said, also sharing the stories of real people, sharing the stories of people on the ground, like those wonderful stories that Caroline was sharing with us as well today. And then we have also informal processes. These are processes that are very formal that already exist, but there's other informal processes where we're still contributing, like all the awareness that we do, how we speak to our friends, what we speak about in our conversations, if we do any outreach campaigns, engage with the media, or we also, sometimes there's civil society organizations that publish reports that help bring the voice of those that are not normally heard or do not have a space. And as such, I think we also are very important agents that can help keep civil society to account, that can help keep private sector to account, and that can contribute in different processes. So I think I'll leave it up there, except that I would like to read just one thing that I read today, because I heard we were saying that how this is a, the Sustainable Development Goals and the agenda was made by a group of people and will be lived by others. But there's the wisdom also of the people that made these goals, that it ideated the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was a phrase I heard yesterday from David Attenborough, and he was saying, this is the story of everyone alive now, and it does not stop here. The final chapters is ours to write. We know what we need to do. By making the right choices in the next 10 years, we can rewild the world and create a rich, thriving, and sustainable future for ourselves on Earth. We can yet become the heroes of our own story. We have it in our power, disaster or triumph. What happens next is up to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Emilia. And thanks to all of you for your presentations. We have about 20 minutes left now for discussion, and the questions are already kind of flooding in. I want to take the kind of chair's prerogatives to sometimes slightly modulate some of the questions that are online, and maybe fill them in a little bit. So I apologize to anybody who's asked the questions hoping me to ask it verbatim. But there's one that's gained quite a bit of traction already and is kind of at the top of the list. And this is somebody who says, as a young person, I fully agree that it feels personal. And by it, that person is talking about Brexit, the Black Lives Matter, the political election in the US, et cetera, et cetera. And the question is, why doesn't the aging population, or perhaps the older generation, feel the same way? I think it goes back to what you were saying in the beginning, Caroline, that in fact, many of the responses that young people are having, many of the expressions of anxiety are really should be natural response mechanisms to some of the urgent things that are going on in the world. So I encourage you, Caroline, to talk about that question, but in particular, I want to take a particular aspect of that question and ask you also, why is it that young people are, as you know, feel so close to nature, as it were? Why? I mean, that might seem like a slightly silly question. Maybe the answer is obvious, but there seems to be a kind of disconnect as we get older. The kind of planet's woes seem to become more abstract, while younger populations seem to be, you know, for them it feels so much more personal. Why is that?
Okay, thank you. Very good question. I'm going to start with just a little bit of sympathy towards adults, and then we'll talk about young people. And one of the things, many adults do care, but it can be hard to care when you are maybe having to prioritize putting food on the table, or maybe having to prioritize dealing with institutional racism or homophobia or poverty or losing your job or dealing with a war. So adult concerns will sometimes move completely towards that survival and protection of the family. So just to have a little moment of sympathy and empathy and understanding for adults, many of whom would like to care, and sometimes that caring can be more difficult because it can get dominated by worldly concerns. And I don't think that means that they should stop caring about the environment and stop caring about climate. I think we have to do both. So we need both and solutions, and not split into the either or. Either I care about my family or I care about the planet. I mean, exaggerating to make a point, but I think it's really important that we maintain this integrated way of perceiving ourselves as part of nature, part of the natural world, part of the environment, and deal with the vulnerability and the struggle and the uncertainty that can raise for us when we realize just how dependent we are on the environment around us. And I think children and young people do not defend against that knowledge as much as adults do. I think adults like to sort of often, I'm exaggerating and I do apologize, we're not all like this, but I think we can often kind of just distance ourselves from that. So we develop this anthropocentric worldview where humans, adults are apex, and really we need to knock that one on the head, frankly. And I think children and young people are not as close to that. So they are more interconnected with the natural world, less likely to value a tree simply because of its economic value, but more able to stay connected with the beauty of the tree and the meaning of the tree and the worthwhileness of the tree in the world. So I think it's, you know, I think that's something that frequently indigenous peoples and poets and creative people and children generally, I know I'm generalizing, so don't hate me. We're all trying to work back towards that. And I think that's part of the solution here. So we need the both and, but we also need to bring into that the awareness of this emotional connection with this, that it's not just about the behavioral relationship. So we need to sort of give adults permission as well as support children and young people in feeling the despair and the grief on behalf of the planet, as we watch that destruction. We shouldn't be hardening ourselves to this and defending against it and saying, well, this is just progress or this is just economic development and you'll understand when you grow up. I mean, if that's the case, then I certainly don't want to grow up. So really, I think we have to be careful about how we frame those things and actually listen to the wisdom of children and young people there.
Thank you. You've also said in the past that one of the ways in which we adults teach our children about relationships and explain to our children about, you know, love and friendship and things like that is all about animals. We use animals allegorically very often.
Always.
Exactly.
Puppies, bears, kittens, absolutely.
Yeah.
We develop empathy and relationship through that interconnection.
Yeah. Ever since you said that, actually, I've become very attuned to the fact that I have a young son, and pretty much all the stories I tell him or read to him are all about animals and the planet. And you know, we've been doing that for a while. So no wonder that up until a certain age, at least, before perhaps a disconnect starts happening. But the worries about the planet are felt very intrinsically because it's, you know, these are their friends. Yeah. Again, generalizing, I don't want to be too platitudinal, but I want to refer something to you, Anna, and that is, so Caroline just talked about this kind of either or fallacy. So, you know, we need to get away from this idea of either you're a this or you're a that. Either you're a climate warrior or you're a climate change denier. You know, you either go all in or you're not in at all. And you mentioned something in your presentation about, you know, your friend who finds it challenging to be activated or to who finds that there's this barrier towards climate, even being an activist or being engaged, because she finds that she has to use a car for her livelihood, and she feels perhaps hypocritical and guilty. Do you have any? I mean, do you have any insights there, or any? You know, what are the conversations that you end up having with this friend to try and convince her that it doesn't have to be either or, it doesn't have to be one or the other?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's a good question, because I think a lot of people, because they feel a bit guilty, it's easier to say that, well, at least I'm not saying that we need to do this and this, and I'm not telling you that you need to act like this and this. So I guess then I'm fine, then I'm off the hook. But it's also not a sustainable solution, both for the future and also for our mental health at where we are right now in this situation. So I guess just to also, for me personally, it's really important to say that I'm not perfect either. I can do lots more, and I guess that's also how it is being a human being in this world right now. You can't be perfect all the time. And also because we're living under the system that we are, it is not always easy. And especially if you say you're a student, you don't have that much money in a month. So you have to prioritize how to use your money. And then it's so much cheaper and also faster to take the plane from, for example, you're studying in Oslo and then you're going home to your parents on holidays in another city, and it's so much easier and cheaper to go there by plane. Then that's it's really easy to make that choice, and that's also why we need the systematic changes, as Emilia talked about, that help us choose more sustainable for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely sympathize with you there. The kind of the climate change, some of the climate change demands, as it were, that we perhaps impose on ourselves, so that we, and perhaps especially young people, feel they need to do are really, I mean, quite heroic compared to a previous generation that never needed to think about anything like that, who could just kind of step on a plane with impunity and go to the holidays that they wanted to, and suddenly all these things seem to have become, seem to be questioned. I want to go back to the online questions. There's one here that I think is really pertinent. About from another young climate activist. This is specifically addressed to you, Anna, but I think it's something perhaps, Emilia, that you can also comment on, because you've talked a lot about engagement in your presentation. And this is, do you feel, this is addressed to you, Anna, do you feel listened to and respected by the older generation and the decision makers when you have the opportunity to talk or present? And this might include even this webinar, so feel free to be critical. But what can they do better? Like what could we do better in this webinar, or what can others do better in listening to young people and giving you the feeling that you not only listened to, but that what you have said also kind of has an effect, if you see what I mean?
Thank you. Yeah, well, to be honest, I think you're doing a really great job with this seminar. I feel taken seriously, absolutely. So thank you for that. And I can maybe give an example from my my previous experience with being a part of the whole UNFCCC climate negotiations, and also then the pre-work that's done here in Norway. So we are quite lucky, I would say, in Norway. I know not every country has this in the UNFCCC bubble. That's the climate convention. Mm-hmm. But Norway has, as you know, a youth delegate that's a part of the national group of bureaucrats going to negotiate on behalf of Norway, and you have this youth representatives in some other countries, but not in all. And what I find very interesting when I talk to other youth that's also part of the climate negotiations is that in Norway, at least with the system we have right now, we are invited in before we are leaving to the conference, and invited in to come with suggestions and our views on the matters directly to the climate minister, as well as the head of the delegation. And during the 2 weeks of negotiations, we are in dialogue with the Norwegian delegation and invited in on meetings, and we are also able to reach out to them and have meetings with each and every delegate we want to take up a matter with. And the fact that they are so easy to just grab hold of mm-hmm. is really helpful. And I think, even though of course we can suggest something and then they say, yeah, well, that's a good idea, but we have a mandate from Norway, so we can't do more here. Mm-hmm. So then the climate minister comes the second week, and then we can suggest changes to him. But then also he maybe, or she maybe, says that, well, the government, the one ruling in Norway right now, this is not the politics. But at least we have a dialogue. Mm. And then our next step then as civil society is to go to the press and put this pressure, as Emilia talked about, on the politicians to make a change in the national politics. But at least we are invited in and included, and mm-hmm. being able to have this dialogue. And I think that's really important as a start.
Thank you. That's really good to know. Emilia, taking on board what you were saying, I mean, you presented a whole slide on engagement, and obviously that's across communities and ages, presumably, but nevertheless, it strikes me that the younger generation is a particularly important stakeholder. since they're the ones who are going to live with the after effects. So I'm just wondering if that's reflected in the efforts of engaging with stakeholders, trying to be trying to think of young people as particularly important in this conversation, and whether or not you have any examples, as it were, of youth engagement within the work that you do.
We definitely think and promote that the youth is a very important stakeholder in many of our work. For example, we have produced in our team, a very young colleague actually coordinated the development of a youth brochure, which was in a way to try to highlight what are the relevant health challenges for the youth, and as well what are the challenges for the youth themselves as well in living healthy and fulfilling lives. So we definitely promote that a lot, and we have tried also to identify those examples where that has been successful, and where there's different also mechanisms in which youth has been engaged. An example that we have seen often is an example of the Welsh government in Wales, where they created an act which is called the I can't remember exactly the name, but this act is on sustainability and the Future Generations Act is, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember the name before, the Future Generations Act. And in there, there's a whole mechanism in which youth has to be engaged. There's a representative that also analyzes any policy that the government does, and makes advice whether provides advice whether that policy actually is protecting the interests of future generations, or it is not protecting it. And then it is up to politicians, of course, to decide, but there's a whole act about it, like how we do the health impact assessment. So this is kind of like a future generation impact assessment, how the policy choices that they make right now, how will that impact on the future generations? And I'd say as well, another important example is the environmental health process in the European region as well. There's a whole group of youth that has been engaged in making policies, in also informing some of the work that the environmental and health process does. And that's a very political process in the end, where there's a lot of recommendations and political declarations, and the youth has a voice there. And I think there's some studies there also trying to identify what makes participation meaningful. And one of them is like engage, like if I would give an advice to the policymakers and people who are trying to engage the youth is as well, make sure that you make that engagement representative and inclusive, and that you're really trying to figure out the ways in which you can make that representative. That there's commitment and accountability as well, that you plan that in a way that you plan also the mechanisms in which you are going to be held to account, and also you're going to keep the youth informed, and they know how they can keep you to account. And that is very transparent process as well. To ensure transparency, and that means sharing information, what's being done well, what is not being done well, why are we not doing things well as well. Failures are for learning as well. It's not to be hidden, but we need to learn from those failures. So those are three kind of principles that have been identified as well in one study where that makes participation meaningful for any group. Either it is a youth group, or it's a particular group of interest people, students, academics, elderly, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think accountability is an obvious and key concept here, and maybe reformulate it slightly. I guess what that means is to be able to show how you've taken on board the commentary or the insights or the thoughts of the people that you're engaging, whether they are of a younger or older generation, but making sure you explain how you're taking on board and acting on their advice, because I think there's often a disconnect between giving advice or being listened to and not knowing what that leads to. We've actually reached the end of our time. I do want to take a couple minutes extra and finish off on a final question, which kind of combines two questions. We have a question here about that I'm just going to read it. It says, what other than recognizing the importance, doing some PR and research, is WHO going to do for children's well-being in regard to their feelings about climate change? So I think what this question is saying is, except for talking, what are you actually going to do about it? And to that, I would say, as a slight caveat, I would say talking about it is already, I think, an important first step. Acknowledging, recognizing, bringing attention to an issue is often the absolute first step that you have to take. But I accept the question, and I accept the challenge. And maybe we can do rather than just making it about WHO, maybe we can make that as a final closing question, where each of us can kind of say a little bit about, what are the three things that we can do to either improve, there's another question here about what are the three best things that we can do to help with climate change. So maybe we can combine those two questions. Say, what are the three best things that we as individuals can do to help with climate change, or if there are any three things that organizations, governments, people like myself and Emilia should take on board in order to better recognize and support, as the question was saying, the well-being of young people. So I'm going to start with Anna, if that's okay with you. Just some thoughts maybe on either what can we do in relation to climate change, or what can we do in relation to listening more to young people.
Thank you. Yes, well, I would say that well, we know the importance of constructively changing the system, and we know that what needs to be done. So it's important for politicians to both listen and act on the suggestions from youth, and regarding what people can do in their everyday life. Talk about the challenges and accept that we don't, maybe we can't solve everything for ourselves. We need to talk about this. It is challenging, but support actions that lead us towards a better future.
Thank you. Emilia, do you have any kind of top tips, as it were, in our final minutes?
I'd say definitely engage in conversations and provide feedback, because I think that a lot of times there's definitely a lot of very useful and smart initiatives and ideas as well on what needs to be changed. But as I said, sometimes this is not very easy to be translated into real life. So I think as much as we listen and we provide feedback back and why we're not doing the things is part of also of the transparency and accountability, then we can figure out better solutions and how we could definitely adapt. Instead of being perfectionist, then we're maybe fairly perfectionist, and that can help move forward. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share the panel with all of you as well.
Thank you, Emilia. And finally, last but certainly not least, Caroline, any final thoughts?
Thank you. A couple of years ago, I was talking with a group of young people in the UK about what they wanted from education to help them prepare for the future that was coming. And I just want to tell you a little bit of what they said, and then I'll add one thing to it. They said, amongst other things, they want lessons in schools about how to grow plants, how to build boats, how to build houses. But they also said they wanted lessons in how to have difficult conversations with parents and adults about this. And they also said they wanted lessons in schools on how to lobby politicians on this. So I would strongly advocate that. I think alongside that, we also need to, both in schools and out of schools, we don't want to over-professionalize this, have much more emotional, psychological support for young people outside of professions, so we don't over-professionalize it, about building emotional resilience and about supporting young people in developing their own support networks around that. And I think as adults, we should be funding that, we should be supporting it, and we should be enabling young people to create their own networks. There's groups of youth activists in the UK that are asking me to run workshops for them on psychology, so they've got the skills, they've got the tools, and then I can pull out. The other thing we need to do is lower the voting age to 12 globally on these issues, because then we would give real power to the young people, as opposed to any form of tokenistic listening, which we may be doing as much as we can do, but unless we take action and lower the voting age to 12 on these issues, there will be no sufficient sustainable radical change in the long term. So that's my last word.
Thank you very much, Caroline. That is a radical suggestion to leave us with. It's been a real pleasure listening to all of your insights, listening to your thoughts. I hope there's more we can do than just talk. I do take what Emilia was saying about accountability seriously. So I'd like to encourage all of our listeners to stay involved, to fill in the questionnaire as a simple first step, to leave your email address so we can continue to be in contact, and we can let you know where we take this conversation and what we intend to do with it. So please have a look on the Slido page. The survey is now open, and I do encourage you to fill it in, and ideally to also leave your email address if you want to. We have reached the end of our hour-long session. I want to remind you about the next webinar. It's going to be called Alone in the Crowd. It looks at belonging and loneliness, again, amongst young people in particular, but as an issue more broadly as well. It'll take place on the 10th of December at the usual time of 12 to 1 o'clock GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, and 1 to 2 p.m. Central European Time. So I very much hope to see many of our online audiences back for that. But that's it for today. I do want to once more thank our panel members for their insights, for their time, for the wonderful conversations. These are incredibly enriching moments, certainly for me, and I hope to our audience as well. I want to thank our audience for the questions that they've asked. And I hope to see many of you, or I hope many of you will be tuning in again for the next webinar. But for now, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.